The first time I saw him, I was standing at the coffee machine, pouring myself a lukewarm espresso that tasted more like burnt water than anything resembling real coffee. And suddenly, the whole office went silent, like someone had turned down the volume on the world. Heads lifted above computer screens, fingers froze above keyboards, even the usually chatty receptionist stopped mid-sentence. And then he walked in. Our new CEO. Tall, sharp suit, shiny watch that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and that arrogant half-smile of someone who thought the entire world was his personal playground. He didn't even look around as if trying to get to know the place. He walked straight through the open office like he already owned every chair, every desk, every one of us. I glanced at my colleague Petra, who gave me a look that said everything. Here we go. Rumors had been flying for weeks. Our old CEO had retired suddenly, almost too suddenly, and the board had appointed this young guy, barely in his 30s, who had made some flashy name for himself in a tech startup. People said he was brilliant, a visionary. Others whispered that he was ruthless, that he believed in cutting the fat and bringing in new blood. I already knew what that meant. Those of us who had been holding the company together for years were suddenly expendable. The first day, he called an all-hands meeting. He didn't introduce himself in any warm or human way. Instead, he stood on the small stage in our conference hall with his hands casually in his pockets and said, "Let's be honest. This company has been running like an old car that hasn't been serviced in years. Rusty, slow, inefficient. That ends today. I'm here to rebuild it into something faster, leaner, stronger." He scanned the room as if daring anyone to challenge him. I felt his eyes pass over me, but not stop. To him, I was just one of many faces, one more interchangeable employee in a sea of replaceable parts. Then he added with a smirk, "Some of you may not make it to the finish line, and that's fine. I prefer to work with winners anyway." That was the moment I knew the atmosphere in our office would never be the same. Over the next few weeks, the changes came like waves hitting a cliff. First, people from his old company started appearing, young men and women with slick haircuts and loud voices, full of startup slang and confidence. They strutted through the halls like they had been here forever. Then came the first firings. One Monday morning, everyone in HR was suddenly busy. By Friday, 3 of our most experienced managers were gone. No explanations, just realignment and strategic restructuring. The hallways felt heavier, the air thicker, as if every conversation could be the last before you, too, were called into that dreaded meeting room. People stopped talking during lunch. We used to share jokes, gossip, and homemade pastries in the kitchen. Now everyone ate quietly at their desks, eyes darting to the CEO's office door. You could feel the tension, like before a storm when the sky is still, but you know the thunder will break any moment. I tried to stay invisible. I told myself, just keep working, keep your head down, don't give him a reason to notice you. I had been with the company for 6 years, building solid relationships with our clients, doing the kind of quiet, unglamorous work that didn't get applause but kept the business alive. Especially with our partners in Iceland, a relationship so fragile and so valuable that only someone who could truly understand their language and culture could maintain it. That someone was me. But of course, he didn't know that. And worse, he didn't care. One morning, during a staff briefing, he made a sarcastic comment about old ways of doing things and pointless specialties. He laughed as he said, "Icelandic? Who needs that?" A few people chuckled nervously, but I sat perfectly still, forcing my face into neutrality. Inside, though, my stomach clenched. He had no idea. None. That afternoon, Petra leaned over my desk and whispered, "He's planning another round of cuts. Did you hear?" I shook my head. 3 more departments on the list," she continued, her voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. "And he's already bringing in more of his people. It's like he's replacing us piece by piece." I glanced toward his office. The glass walls gave him a clear view of everyone, while we could all see him laughing loudly with his new hires, slapping them on the back as if this was all a game. It wasn't a game for us. That evening, as I packed up my things, I overheard two of the new recruits joking in the hallway. Can you believe some of these dinosaurs still use personal calls to clients? No wonder this place is stuck in the past. I bit my tongue. They didn't know that those personal calls had saved contracts worth millions. They didn't know that one wrong word in translation could destroy years of trust with the Icelandic partners. They didn't know that while they were busy talking about efficiency, I had spent countless late nights making sure the contracts didn't fall apart over cultural misunderstandings. But why would they? The CEO hadn't bothered to ask. The storm was building, and I could feel it pressing closer every day. My colleagues walked with tense shoulders, as if waiting for a hand to tap them on the back and call them into the room of no return. The silence in the office was no longer just uncomfortable, it was suffocating. And deep down, I knew my turn was coming. I had worked at that company for 15 years. 15 years of long flights, jet-lagged mornings, and endless calls across time zones, keeping relationships alive with partners who didn't trust easily, who demanded patience, nuance, and cultural respect. I had been there when our first international contract was signed. I had watched it nearly collapse twice, and both times it was me who had rebuilt the trust. I wasn't just an employee. I was the bridge between our business and people halfway across the world. But the longer the new CEO stayed, the clearer it became that in his eyes, my years meant nothing. It started small. Invitations to meetings that used to arrive automatically somehow stopped coming. Notes were circulated without my name on the copy list. I'd overhear discussions about new strategies for partner communication being led by people who had never spoken a word to a foreign client in their lives. At first, I told myself it was just oversight, but soon the pattern was too obvious to ignore. One morning, we had a strategy session with the executive team. I sat at the far end of the glossy table, my notes ready, contract files stacked neatly in front of me. I had prepared to give an update about our Icelandic partners, an update that mattered, because they were coming for an in-person visit the following week. It would be their first time stepping foot in our office, a big deal after years of cautious online cooperation. The CEO walked in 5 minutes late, as usual, tossing his jacket onto a chair like it was an afterthought. He didn't sit at the head of the table, but leaned against it casually, arms crossed, surveying us as though deciding who was worth his time. "All right," he said, without even glancing at the agenda. "We need to streamline. Too many people doing things that don't add value." His eyes landed on me, pausing just a fraction longer than on anyone else. I cleared my throat and began. "I wanted to update everyone on the upcoming visit from—" He cut me off with a laugh. "The Icelanders, right? Yes, I've heard. But honestly, how much does that really matter? We're building a future here, not running a tourist guide service." There was an awkward silence. Petra shifted uncomfortably beside me, while a couple of his new recruits chuckled along with him, eager to show loyalty. I forced myself to remain calm. They represent nearly 20% of our overseas contracts. Their visit is a critical opportunity to strengthen. Sure, he interrupted again, waving his hand dismissively. "But I don't need a whole lecture on cultural small talk. I want to hear about numbers, efficiency, speed. That's what matters. Not how to say hello in Icelandic." The room went cold. I felt the blood rushing to my face, but I swallowed it down. He didn't understand, or worse, he didn't care. 15 years of building something he couldn't even recognize. Later that afternoon, just as I was trying to shake off the humiliation of that meeting, my phone rang. It was HR. The voice on the other end was clipped, rehearsed. "Alfia, could you step into conference room B at 3 o'clock? I froze. Everyone knew what that meant. The walk down the hallway felt endless. My colleagues avoided my eyes. Petra looked at me with pity but said nothing. When I reached the conference room, the HR manager was already seated, a folder neatly placed in front of her. The CEO was there too, leaning back in his chair, scrolling on his phone like this was just another item on his busy schedule. "Please sit," HR said politely, though her expression was strained. I sat, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. The CEO didn't even bother with small talk. Alfia, thank you for your years of service, but as of today, your position has been eliminated. Just like that. I blinked. Eliminated? My voice cracked despite my best effort. I've been managing our international accounts for over a decade. The Icelandic delegation. He finally looked up from his phone, smirking. We'll manage. These things aren't as complicated as you make them sound. We've got Google Translate after all. He chuckled at his own joke, as if he had said something clever. HR slid the folder across the table. Inside, you'll find the details of your severance package. It's the standard compensation, 2 months' salary plus unused vacation days. We'll need your security badge by the end of the day. I stared at her. Standard compensation? After 15 years? She avoided my eyes. The CEO shrugged, tapping his pen against the table impatiently. It's generous, considering we're restructuring. Most companies wouldn't offer more. I wanted to scream, to stand up and tell him that without me, he was about to walk into disaster. That the Icelandic partners weren't people you could just manage with a few empty handshakes and a translation app. That relationships built on trust could collapse in seconds if he made the wrong move, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I asked quietly, "And what happens to my accounts?" "Oh, don't worry," he said, smiling in that condescending way that made my stomach twist. "We'll redistribute them. The new team will take care of everything. Fresh perspectives are always better." He stood, signaling the meeting was over. Just like that, my 15 years were dismissed as if they had never happened. When I left the room, the office felt different. Colder. People glanced up from their screens as I passed, their eyes quickly darting away again. Nobody said anything, though I could feel the tension ripple through the floor. Everyone knew, if it happened to me, it could happen to them. Back at my desk, I stared at the photos pinned to my cubicle wall. Snapshots from business trips, thank you cards from clients, even a postcard from Reykjavik that one partner had once sent me with a handwritten note. Takk fyrir traustið. Thank you for the trust. I swallowed hard, my throat burning. Trust. That was what I had given this company. And in return, I was handed a folder with standard compensation, typed neatly inside. I packed my things slowly, each item feeling heavier than it should. The office around me buzzed with artificial cheerfulness, as though people were afraid to acknowledge what was happening right in front of them. When I finally handed in my badge at reception, the CEO passed by with 2 of his new recruits. He didn't even look at me, didn't even say goodbye. It was as if I had never existed. But as I stepped out of the building into the late afternoon air, I knew one thing for certain. He had just made the biggest mistake of his career. When the CEO stood up in that sterile conference room, dismissing me as if I had been nothing more than a temporary inconvenience, something inside me shifted. I had expected anger, maybe even tears, but instead I felt only a strange calm. 15 years of service reduced to a folder of papers and a 2-month severance check, and yet I wasn't trembling or begging. I was already beyond that. I looked at him, this man who thought he understood business simply because he knew how to smile at investors and throw around words like efficiency and disruption. He had no idea what storm he had just invited into his neatly polished world. I gathered my things, stood slowly, and before leaving the room, I said the only words that came to me. "I wish you success on Monday." The HR manager frowned, confused. The CEO smirked as if I had said something foolish, a puzzle too trivial for him to bother solving. Neither of them asked what I meant. I didn't explain. I walked out with steady steps, my face unreadable. I could feel the eyes of my colleagues following me as I passed their desks, but I gave no sign of distress. Not a single crack in my expression. If anything, I wanted them to see that I wasn't broken. I was finished here, yes, but not destroyed. I packed my personal belongings into a cardboard box. The framed postcard from Reykjavik, the mug Petra had given me one Christmas, the worn notebook filled with years of careful notes from negotiations. I slid each item into the box deliberately, as though sealing away the years themselves. When the box was full, I placed it under my arm, walked to the elevator, and pressed the button without looking back. At reception, I handed in my badge. The young receptionist looked nervous, as though she wanted to say something but couldn't. I gave her a small nod, a silent reassurance, and left. The glass doors slid closed behind me, with a quiet hiss. And just like that, 15 years ended. That night, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by silence. I made tea, placed the box of office belongings on the kitchen table, and opened it slowly. One by one, I lifted the pieces of my old life. Each one carried memories. Late nights, tense meetings, victories I had fought for alone. For a moment, sadness threatened to creep in, but then I remembered the CEO's smirk, his laugh when he dismissed Icelandic as irrelevant. And instead of sadness, I felt certainty. He thought he had won. But Monday was coming. I didn't need revenge. The consequences were already on their way, built into the very fabric of the company's future. All I had to do was step aside and let gravity do its work. For the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully. The next morning, my phone rang earlier than usual. I expected it to be Petra, perhaps calling to check on me, but instead, an unfamiliar number flashed across the screen. I hesitated, then answered. "Alfia?" a man's voice asked, careful, polite. "Yes?" "This is Jonas Eriksson, director at Nordatlantic Logistics. I hope I'm not calling too early." My breath caught. I knew that name. Nordatlantic was one of the major players in the region, a competitor we had often crossed paths with indirectly. I sat up straighter. "Not at all. How can I help you?" There was a brief pause. Then he continued, "I heard about your situation yesterday." News travels fast. And, if I may be blunt, I believe your former employer has made a grave mistake. Your reputation precedes you, especially regarding your work with Iceland. My heart pounded. "Go on. We've long admired the way you handled those partnerships, the cultural sensitivity, the precision. It's rare, Alfia, very rare. We'd like to offer you a position with us, Head of International Relations. Competitive salary, relocation support if needed, and, most importantly, full autonomy in managing Icelandic contracts. We believe your expertise is invaluable." I didn't answer right away. I stared at the sunlight filtering through the blinds, thinking of the sterile conference room, the dismissive smirk of the CEO, the folder of standard compensation. Then I thought of the postcard from Reykjavik, the words written in careful handwriting. "Thank you for the trust." Trust. That was what I had lost yesterday, but it was what I was being offered again today. Finally, I said, "I'm interested." The process moved faster than I could have imagined. By the afternoon, I was sitting in a video call with their executive team, discussing details of the role. They weren't just polite. They listened. When I spoke about the nuances of Icelandic business culture, they leaned in, asked questions, took notes. They didn't laugh. They didn't dismiss. They respected what I had to say. When the offer letter arrived in my inbox that evening, I stared at it for a long time. 15 years at one company ended by a man who thought language and culture were irrelevant. And now, less than 24 hours later, another company was not only acknowledging my skills, but valuing them as central to their future. I clicked accept. The next few days passed in a blur of arrangements, calls, and paperwork. I informed Petra privately, and she congratulated me with tears in her eyes. "They don't deserve you," she said, her voice trembling, "but I'm glad someone else does." I packed away the remains of my old life, not with sorrow, but with a strange sense of liberation. I wasn't carrying baggage anymore. I was carrying proof of what I had survived. And always, at the back of my mind, I thought of Monday. On Sunday night, I prepared myself for my first day at the new company. I laid out my clothes, packed my bag, and checked the directions to their office twice. Everything was ready, but as I turned off the lights and climbed into bed, I couldn't help smiling at the thought of what was about to happen across town, in the office I had just left behind. The Icelandic delegation would arrive on Monday morning. They would walk into that sleek building, expecting to see the one person they trusted, the one person who understood them. They would ask for me, and they would learn that I had been dismissed like an afterthought. I wondered how the CEO would explain it. I wondered how quickly his smirk would fade when he realized there was no one left to bridge the gap, no one to translate not just the words, but the meaning, the unspoken layers of culture and trust. I didn't need to be there to watch it happen. The collapse would right itself. When my alarm rang at 6 a.m., I rose with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. A new job, a new beginning, a new respect. I was no longer the invisible employee waiting for recognition. I was stepping into a place where my work mattered from the very first day. As I locked the door behind me and walked toward the future, I whispered the same words I had spoken in that conference room. I wish you success on Monday. But now, the words carried a different weight. They weren't a farewell. They were a prophecy. Monday morning arrived with its usual grayness, but for once, I wasn't rushing into the office with a stack of files under my arm and my phone buzzing with last-minute emails. Instead, I was sitting in a new office, fresh coffee in hand, quietly watching the city through wide glass windows. My laptop was already set up, and the first welcome flowers from my new company sat neatly on my desk. But across town, at the company I had just left, a very different scene was unfolding. The delegation from Iceland arrived promptly at 9. They were punctual people, always respectful of time, and I knew they would expect the same courtesy in return. 5 of them walked into the building: the director of their firm, 2 senior advisors, and 2 younger specialists. I could picture it clearly: the polite handshakes, the brief greetings in Icelandic. Only this time, there was no one there to answer them properly. The receptionist smiled nervously, offered them water, and quickly called upstairs. Within minutes, the new CEO appeared, flanked by 2 of his recruits. He looked confident, as always, but his confidence began to crack the moment the Icelanders spoke. "Where is Alfea?" their director asked plainly, his English laced with a thick accent, but his tone unmistakably sharp. The CEO gave his practiced smile. "Alfea is no longer with the company, but don't worry, we'll take excellent care of you." The room froze. The partners exchanged glances, their brows furrowing. Finally, one of them said coldly, "She was the only reason we trusted you." From what Petra later told me, the rest of the meeting spiraled quickly into chaos. The CEO tried to fill the silence with talk of numbers, efficiencies, growth strategies. He spoke faster than usual, as if speed could hide the emptiness of his words. But the Icelandic delegation didn't nod politely like other clients might. They sat stone-faced, occasionally whispering to each other in Icelandic, and each time they did, the CEO looked more uncomfortable. At one point, one of the senior advisors interrupted him outright. "You dismiss the only person who understood us, and you expect trust? This is disrespect." The CEO laughed nervously. "I think there's a misunderstanding. Relationships aren't about one person, they're about the company as a whole." The director leaned forward. His voice was calm, but it cut through the room like a knife. They are about people. For 15 years, we worked with Alfea. She listened. She respected us. You remove her without explanation, as if she was nothing. If she is nothing, then we are nothing to you as well." The CEO opened his mouth, but no words came out. His recruits shifted uncomfortably beside him, clearly realizing too late how far out of their depth they were. The Icelanders stood up. Just like that. No drawn-out negotiations, no shouting. They simply gathered their papers, placed them back into their leather folders, and said, "We will not continue." Someone from the finance team rushed in, trying to salvage the situation. "Please, perhaps we can—" But the director shook his head firmly. "We will not work with a company that treats its partners with such arrogance. The contract is void." And with that, they walked out. By lunchtime, the news had spread across the office like wildfire. The $20 million contract, one of the most significant in the company's international portfolio, was gone. Employees whispered in hallways, messages buzzed on Slack, rumors twisted and grew with each retelling. Some said the partners had stormed out shouting, others said they had left in silence, but the fact was undeniable. The deal was dead. Panic set in almost immediately. The finance department was thrown into emergency meetings. The sales team looked pale, realizing how much of their quarterly targets had just evaporated. Even the HR manager, the same one who had slid my severance folder across the table without meeting my eyes, looked shaken as she hurried past with a stack of documents pressed tightly to her chest. But the one who felt it most was the CEO. His reputation had been built on his supposed ability to fix failing companies. Yet here he was, barely a month into his reign, and he had just destroyed a contract worth $20 million, all because he had laughed at the value of a language and dismissed the one person who understood its importance. Petra later told me that by the afternoon, the atmosphere in the office was unbearable. People avoided looking at the CEO when he passed. Whispers followed him down the hall. Can you believe it? 20 million gone. All because he thought Icelandic was useless. What's going to happen to us now? By evening, the rumors had spread beyond the office. Clients were calling, concerned about instability. Suppliers hesitated to sign renewals. Even some of the new recruits looked uneasy, suddenly realizing that loyalty to the CEO might not protect them from the fallout. The word crisis began to hang in the air, spoken quietly but with growing certainty. And me? I sat in my new office, the hum of quiet efficiency around me, while my phone buzzed with messages from former colleagues. Some were sympathetic, others were panicked, but all of them confirmed what I had known when I walked out of that conference room. The consequences were already in motion. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I simply closed my eyes for a moment and breathed. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free from a place that had never truly seen me, and free to build something new, where my work mattered. The company I had left behind was crumbling under the weight of its own arrogance. And I was just getting started. When the Icelandic delegation left that Monday morning, it wasn't just one contract slipping through the cracks. It was the first stone pulled from a fragile wall, and the collapse that followed was inevitable. Inside my old company, panic turned to denial, and denial quickly turned into chaos. The CEO gathered the executive team for an emergency meeting. According to Petra, he slammed his hand on the table and barked, "This is not our fault. The Icelanders were unreliable from the start. External contractors must have poisoned the relationship." No one responded. They all knew it wasn't true. For 15 years, that partnership had been stable. Cautious at times, yes, but consistent. They had trusted me, and only me. The CEO's words rang hollow, and everyone in the room knew it. Within 48 hours, the ripples began. Word spread through the industry, faster than the CEO ever expected. Other international partners started calling, politely but firmly asking why their longtime contact, the person who had built years of trust, was no longer employed there. They didn't like the evasive answers they received. And one by one, those polite questions turned into something sharper: doubt. By the end of the week, 3 more contracts were suspended. A German partner requested clarification before signing an extension. A Canadian client suddenly delayed a payment, citing internal review. And a Scandinavian logistics group, one that had always followed Iceland's lead, sent an email stating bluntly that they would not proceed without me. The CEO tried to spin it. In town hall meetings, he stood in front of anxious employees and repeated the same lines. "We're in control. These are minor setbacks. The market is shifting." But people weren't fools. They saw the truth in the empty seats at their desks, in the numbers dropping from financial reports, in the growing silence of once reliable clients. Meanwhile, I was settling into my new company with surprising ease. Nord Atlantic welcomed me like I had always belonged. Instead of questioning my methods or dismissing my attention to cultural detail, they encouraged it. "Your relationships are your strength," Jonas, my new director, told me on my second day. "Do whatever you need to maintain them. We trust your judgment. It was the first time in years I had heard those words directed at me. We trust your judgment. So I picked up the phone. Not aggressively, not in a predatory way. I simply reached out to the partners I had known for years. I explained that I had joined a new company, that my work and my principles hadn't changed, and that I remained committed to them. The response was almost immediate. Calls that used to last 20 minutes stretched into an hour. Emails ended not with polite signatures, but with warmth, with relief. We were shocked by how they treated you, one German partner said. They made it clear they do not value respect, another added from Reykjavik. We prefer to work with people, not corporations, the Canadian contact told me, almost apologetically. I didn't push. I didn't need to. Trust does not vanish overnight. It simply changes its address. Back at my old office, things were unraveling faster than even I expected. By the second week, whispers about a serious financial shortfall circulated. Payroll was still met, but rumors spread that reserves were dwindling. The CEO walked the halls with forced confidence, but his eyes betrayed the cracks, darting, defensive, searching for someone else to blame. He fired 2 mid-level managers, claiming they had mishandled communications. But everyone knew it wasn't their fault. He called the marketing team incompetent, accusing them of failing to protect the company's image. But even marketing couldn't spin the truth, that he had dismissed the only bridge between the company and its partners, and now the bridge had been rebuilt elsewhere. Employees started leaving on their own. Some submitted quiet resignations, slipping their notices across HR's desk with little explanation. Others walked out in frustration, unwilling to tolerate the suffocating atmosphere of fear that had settled over every floor. Each departure left the office colder, emptier, and more uncertain. Petra kept me updated in cautious messages. You wouldn't believe it, Alfia. Every day feels like walking through fog. No one knows who's next. Meetings are just excuses for him to yell and assign blame. We've stopped planning for the future. We're just surviving the week. Another message a few days later. They lost the Canadian account. Finance says the hole is more than $30 million now. People are whispering about layoffs. Everyone's watching the CEO, but he still pretends he has control. We all know he doesn't. I read her words with a strange mixture of sorrow and vindication. Sorrow for the colleagues left behind, the ones who didn't deserve to suffer. Vindication because the storm I had warned him about was here, and it was devouring everything in its path. At Nord Atlantic, my days felt entirely different. Instead of endless firefighting, I was laying foundations. I spoke with the Icelandic partners regularly, not as a desperate employee trying to patch holes, but as a respected counterpart building something new. When they visited, they walked into our offices with open expressions, no tension in their shoulders, no suspicion in their eyes. On one call, the director chuckled softly and said, "It seems fate has moved you exactly where you are needed." I smiled. Or perhaps it was arrogance that pushed me here. He nodded knowingly. Arrogance always writes its own ending. By the end of the month, the contrast between my new world and my old one couldn't have been sharper. Nord Atlantic had signed 2 new contracts, one with the Icelanders, one with a German partner who had cut ties with my former company. The CEO at my old firm, meanwhile, was fighting fires that never stopped spreading. His name, once spoken with forced respect, was now accompanied by sighs, rolled eyes, and sarcastic comments. Even the board, who had once praised his vision, had begun to distance themselves. The numbers didn't lie. Millions lost, trust shattered, reputation in tatters. But the staff felt it most. Petra described the office atmosphere as like a funeral. People avoided each other's eyes, afraid to speak openly. Every announcement from leadership was greeted not with relief but dread. The word crisis was no longer whispered. It was spoken openly. I sat at my new desk one evening, the city lights reflecting against the window, and thought about everything that had happened. 15 years of loyalty discarded, yet here I was, stronger than before, surrounded by people who saw value where others saw weakness. The CEO had tried to erase me. Instead, he had erased himself. And though I didn't seek revenge, I couldn't deny a quiet truth. Every time a new contract came to my desk, every time a partner chose to work with me instead of him, it felt like justice. Not loud, not cruel, just inevitable. Because respect, once lost, rarely returns. And he had thrown it away with a laugh. The call came late on a Thursday evening. I had just finished a video conference with one of our new German partners, and the satisfaction of hearing them say, "We trust you more here than we ever did there," was still warming me when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but something in my gut told me to answer. "Alfia?" The voice on the other end was shaky, thinner than I remembered. I recognized it instantly. The CEO. For a second, I didn't speak. I just let the silence hang. Finally, I said evenly, "Yes." "Who is this?" A pause. Then, "It's me. I think we need to talk." His tone was so different from the self-assured arrogance I remembered. Gone was the smug laugh, the clipped certainty. What I heard now was desperation wrapped in forced calm. He cleared his throat. "I've been reflecting on the situation. Perhaps your departure was handled poorly." I raised an eyebrow, even though he couldn't see me. "That's one way of putting it." "I want to propose something," he rushed on, as if afraid I might hang up. "Come back, not officially. The board wouldn't approve, not yet. But as a consultant, you know the clients, you know the relationships. We'll make it worth your while." For a moment, I almost laughed. This was the same man who had looked me in the eye and said, "Icelandic? Who needs that?" The same man who had slid my career into a folder marked standard compensation. Now he wanted me back. Not as an employee with recognition and respect, but as a shadow, hidden behind his failing image of control. Still, I didn't show my hand. Instead, I said quietly, "Let's meet." We chose a cafe halfway between his office and mine. I arrived first, sitting near the window with my back straight, watching people drift past outside. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. The sharp suit was still there, but it hung looser, as if he'd lost weight. His hair was less polished, his movements less certain, and most telling of all, his eyes darted nervously, scanning the room before settling on me. "Ha, Alfia," he said with forced brightness, sliding into the chair opposite mine. "It's good to see you." I tilted my head slightly. "Is it?" He faltered, then forced a smile. "I'll admit, things have been challenging, but every company has setbacks. It's about resilience, about pushing forward. That's what leadership is." I said nothing, just sipped my coffee. Let him fill the silence. And he did. He talked for nearly 15 minutes straight, words tumbling out like a man trying to convince himself more than me. "Yes, we lost a few contracts, but these things happen. External factors, market volatility. The board doesn't always understand the nuances, you know. But I do. I know what needs to be done." His voice lowered. "What I need is someone like you. You can repair the damage, rebuild the relationships. Behind the scenes, of course. No official title, no paperwork. Just a quiet arrangement. You'd be compensated generously." I leaned back, studying him. There it was. The same arrogance, only reshaped by fear. He still believed he could control the narrative, that if I worked invisibly for him, he could cling to the appearance of power. Finally, I spoke. "So you want me to fix what you broke, quietly, so you can stand in front of the board and pretend you've still got control." His jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. I let the silence stretch, then said, "You dismissed me without hesitation. You told everyone I was replaceable. Now you want me to come back as your secret weapon. Tell me, what happens when I succeed? Do I stay invisible while you take the credit again?" He shifted uncomfortably. "This isn't about credit, it's about survival. If the company goes down, everyone loses." I leaned forward, lowering my voice. Number, if the company goes down, you lose. The staff already work in fear. The partners already left. The only thing you're protecting is your chair. His face flushed, but he didn't argue. I sat back, letting him stew in his own silence. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just listening to a man in trouble. I was watching someone clinging to an illusion, a hollow shell of authority that was crumbling faster than he could patch it. And I understood something else too. I didn't need to help him, but I could use this, not for revenge, but for leverage. Every word he spoke, every plea he made, confirmed how weak he truly was. Finally, I smiled faintly. I'll think about it. Relief washed across his face instantly, too eagerly. Good, good. I knew you'd see reason. I'll have someone from my office reach out about terms. I stood, gathering my coat. Don't bother. If I decide, I'll let you know. His expression flickered, a crack of frustration beneath the relief, but he forced another smile. Of course. Take your time. As I walked out of the cafe, the evening air sharp against my skin, I felt lighter. Not because of his offer. I had no intention of becoming his hidden savior, but because now I knew exactly where I stood. He wasn't the powerful leader he pretended to be. He was a desperate man, clinging to appearances, willing to beg the very person he once laughed at to save him. And that meant the balance had shifted. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one on the defensive. I wasn't the one fighting for recognition. I was the one with the choice, the one with the leverage, the one who no longer needed him, but whom he now desperately needed. I walked away, not with anger, but with quiet satisfaction. The game had changed, and this time, I was the one holding the pieces. When I agreed to consult for the company that had thrown me out, I could see the disbelief in Petra's eyes. "You're really going back?" she whispered when we met for coffee. I only smiled. Back? Not exactly. The CEO had made it clear. No official title, no announcements, nothing that would draw the board's attention. He wanted me invisible, working quietly behind the scenes, while he maintained the facade of control. I accepted his terms on paper, but in my mind, I had my own plan. So on a gray Tuesday morning, I walked back into the building I had left with a cardboard box weeks earlier. My badge was temporary, my name absent from the directory, but the looks on employees' faces as I passed were priceless. Shock, confusion, a hint of relief. They didn't understand why I was back, and I didn't explain. The CEO met me with exaggerated cheer. "Good to have you on board again, Alfia. Just keep things discreet." I nodded. Of course. What I didn't say was that discretion worked both ways. The first thing he gave me was access. "You'll need the client database," he said, sliding a laptop toward me. "Rebuild some trust, smooth things over. But remember, you're here to support me, not overshadow." I almost laughed. He had no idea what kind of weapon he'd just handed me. Within hours, I was scrolling through the contact list I knew better than anyone. Names I'd spoken to for years. Notes I had personally written. Details of relationships the CEO had never understood. It felt like opening a diary I myself had written. Every line familiar. Every entry alive with memory. I drafted messages carefully, polite, professional, never overtly disloyal. But between the lines, I let the truth seep through. I reminded clients how long we had worked together, how abruptly our cooperation had ended, how little respect had been shown when trust was treated as disposable. I didn't tell them to leave. I didn't need to. The replies came faster than I expected. "We never understood why you were dismissed, Alfia. Without you, we felt like outsiders. If you are working elsewhere, perhaps we should consider new arrangements." Each response was a thread being pulled, unraveling the fabric of my former company. I didn't push. I simply answered their questions honestly, showing them the cracks, letting them see how little value the CEO placed on relationships. And quietly, I redirected them toward Nord Atlantic. Not with pressure, not with promises, but with reassurance. I made it clear, I was still here, still ready to support them, only now from a place where respect wasn't a joke. Week by week, the shift grew. First, the Germans moved. Their contract with my old company expired, and instead of renewing, they signed with Atlantic. Then the Canadians followed, citing better alignment of values. Even smaller partners, ones who had never been high on the CEO's radar, started slipping away, drawn not to a brand, but to the person they trusted. Inside the office, it looked like sudden collapse. One contract vanished, then another. Numbers dropped, targets failed. The financial hole widened. The CEO stormed through hallways demanding answers. What's happening? Why are they leaving? His managers stammered about market conditions, global instability, currency fluctuations, any excuse they could invent. But none of them dared suggest the obvious. None of them dared say that the real reason was sitting quietly in the corner office he had given me, typing messages with calm precision. Petra told me that employees had started calling the situation the slow bleed. Every week, another client disappeared, another deal evaporated, and the CEO, desperate, angry, red-eyed from sleepless nights, grew more paranoid. In meetings, he barked accusations. "Someone's sabotaging us," he shouted. "Someone inside is feeding information to competitors." I kept my face neutral when he glanced at me, as if I were just another bystander. But deep inside, I knew the truth he would never admit. I wasn't sabotaging anything. I was simply giving clients the respect he had denied them. The collapse wasn't sabotage. It was consequence. At Atlantic, the atmosphere was entirely different. Every time a new contract was signed, Jonas congratulated me personally. "They trust you, Alfia. They follow you, not logos." And he was right. I hadn't stolen anyone. I hadn't twisted arms or whispered threats. I had simply reminded people of what they already knew, that relationships are fragile, and when they are broken, they seek new ground to grow again. The CEO tried to keep his facade alive. He held town halls, spoke about temporary downturns and strategic pivots, but his voice cracked, his eyes darted, and everyone could see through the performance. He blamed external contractors, then the economy, then even the employees themselves, but never himself. That was his fatal flaw. One afternoon, he called me into his office. He looked thinner, paler, like someone aging a decade in a month. "You've been contacting clients, haven't you?" he asked, his voice low, almost trembling. I kept my expression calm. "Of course. That's why you brought me back, isn't it? To rebuild relationships." "Yes, but—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "They're leaving faster than ever. I don't understand it." I tilted my head, letting a silence stretch just long enough to sting. Then I said gently, "Maybe they finally see how you really view cooperation." His face twisted, but he didn't reply. Because he knew it was true. When I left the building that day, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The collapse was no longer a possibility. It was a certainty. The partners had already chosen their future, and it wasn't with him. And me? I walked toward mine, knowing I hadn't just survived. I had shifted the balance entirely. The man who had once laughed at me was now drowning in the consequences of that laugh. And I was building something new, something stronger, on the trust he had thrown away. By the beginning of the next month, the company I had once called home was no longer recognizable. The energy that had once carried us through long days and sleepless nights was gone, replaced by an oppressive heaviness that clung to every hallway. Whispers filled the air, not laughter. Doors were shut more often than open. Even the cafeteria, once buzzing with conversation, now felt like a library before an exam. Silent, tense, suffocating. The layoffs began quietly, then all at once. At first it was streamlining, a handful of junior staff dismissed with cold emails and a cardboard box. But when the numbers didn't improve, entire departments were cut. People who had worked there for years, who had given their weekends and holidays, were suddenly escorted out by HR, as if they were intruders. Petra sent me messages late at night. "It's terrible, Alfia. Every day someone new is gone. People don't even say goodbye anymore. They just disappear. I could picture it. The empty desks, the abandoned coffee mugs, the chairs no one would sit in again. And through it all, the CEO clung to the performance of leadership. He called emergency meetings almost daily, dragging exhausted managers into conference rooms for hours of blame and denial. He clicked through endless PowerPoint slides filled with meaningless buzzwords: pivot, optimization, synergy. But behind the slides, there was nothing. When negotiations failed, and they always did, he would slam his hand on the table and bark, "They were never serious clients." When partners walked away, he blamed unrealistic expectations. When employees left, he muttered about disloyalty. But the truth was written on every line of the financial reports: contracts collapsing, revenue plummeting, trust evaporating. I didn't interfere. I didn't need to. I just sat quietly at my corner desk, his consultant, his supposed secret weapon, watching the company fall apart piece by piece. I acted methodically, almost coldly. Every time a client reached out in confusion or disappointment, I answered. Not with false promises, not with flattery, but with calm honesty. I told them the truth, that respect had been lost, that their value had been dismissed. And then I reminded them, gently, that I was still here, just not in the same company anymore. At Nord Atlantic, my phone never stopped ringing. Contracts that had once been signed in my old office were now landing on my new desk. Partners who had once walked through those glass doors were now touring our new facilities, shaking hands with Jonas and his team, smiling with the same relief I had seen so many times before. I didn't need to persuade anyone. All I did was open the door they were already looking for. Inside the old company, the atmosphere had turned toxic. One afternoon, I walked past a conference room where the CEO was pacing furiously, his voice raised. "Why are negotiations failing? Why are they all going to Nord Atlantic? Someone is leaking information." I kept walking, expression calm, heart steady. He had no idea. He still believed the collapse was external sabotage, not the natural consequence of his arrogance. The staff knew better. They whispered it openly now. "It's him. He's the problem." But no one dared say it to his face. The panic spread outward. Suppliers began demanding payments in advance. Prospective hires turned down offers after a single Google search. Journalists sniffed around, asking questions about sudden instability. Every attempt to patch the image only drew more attention to the cracks. And still, the CEO stood in front of his people, pretending to be in control. His voice grew harsher, his tone sharper, but his eyes betrayed him. Tired, hollow, cornered. Meanwhile, my days at Nord Atlantic were the mirror opposite. Where his meetings were frantic and hostile, ours were focused and calm. Where his negotiations ended in failure, ours began with handshakes and ended with signed agreements. Each time a new partner moved to us, I felt the balance of power shift further. The Icelanders were already fully integrated with us, thriving. The Germans followed. The Canadians signed their biggest deal yet. Even smaller partners, once overlooked, now saw Nord Atlantic as a safe harbor in the storm. Jonas watched it all with quiet satisfaction. "They trust you, Alfia," he told me one evening. "And trust is the only currency that matters." Sometimes, late at night, I thought back to the day I had been fired. The humiliation of sitting in that sterile room, listening to him laugh about my value. The folder of standard compensation. The way he didn't even look me in the eye. And then, I thought about now. The contracts piling on my desk. The partners reaching out to me directly. The board of his company, no doubt whispering behind closed doors about his failures. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like balance being restored. The collapse wasn't loud. It wasn't a dramatic explosion. It was a slow unraveling, 1,000 small cuts that no one bandage could cover. Employees slipping away, clients drifting off, numbers bleeding red across every report. And I was there, not to save it, not to destroy it, but simply to witness it. The company I had once built my life around was dying. Not because of me, but because of the arrogance of one man who believed people didn't matter. He was wrong, and I was the proof. By the time the board finally summoned the CEO for urgent discussions, the company was already balancing on the edge of collapse. Entire teams had disappeared, partners had walked away in silence, and the financials looked more like a countdown than a report. Inside the office, the tension was unbearable. Employees no longer whispered. They openly spoke of leaving, of finding something, anything, that wasn't this sinking ship. I had stayed quiet long enough. Watching from the shadows had been satisfying, yes, but it was time to end it. Not with sabotage, not with revenge, but with truth. So I asked him to meet me. We chose the same cafe, where weeks earlier he had begged me to return as a consultant. This time, he arrived late, his face pale, his eyes ringed with sleepless shadows. He looked older than he had any right to look, like someone carrying the weight of a crumbling empire on his back. He sat down heavily, sighing. "Everything's falling apart. The board wants answers. I don't know what to tell them." I stirred my coffee slowly, then lifted my gaze to his. "Then maybe it's time you finally hear the truth." He frowned. "What truth?" I didn't soften it. The losses, the contracts, the partners, the reputation, they weren't accidents. They weren't sabotage from some shadowy competitor. They were the result of me, of what I chose to do. His mouth fell open slightly. "You?" "Yes." I re-established contact with the partners. I reminded them of the trust we had built for 15 years, the respect I showed them, the value I placed on their culture and their time. And then I reminded them how quickly you threw all of that away. That's all I did. Nothing manipulative, nothing illegal, just the truth. He leaned back in his chair, staring at me as though he'd never really seen me before. "You're saying you made them leave?" I shook my head. You made them leave. I only reminded them of what mattered. Respect. Trust. The things you dismissed as unimportant while you laughed about efficiency and optimization. You fired me like I was nothing. And they realized, if I was nothing to you, then so were they. For a long moment, he said nothing. His hands trembled slightly against the edge of the table. Finally, he whispered, I thought contracts were about numbers. About profit. They never were," I said coldly. "They were always about people. That's why you failed. You destroyed your own position with your own hands, not because I pushed, but because you never understood that relationships can't be optimized like spreadsheets." He looked broken. Truly broken. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something raw. Disbelief, regret, maybe even shame. "You could have told me," he muttered, almost pleading. "You could have warned me." I gave him a hard look. "I did, over and over. You just didn't listen." The silence that followed was heavy. Around us, the cafe bustled with quiet chatter, clinking cups, the hum of ordinary life. But at our table, time seemed to stop. Finally, I stood. "This isn't about revenge, and it never was. I didn't destroy your company. You did. All I did was give people a choice, and they chose respect over arrogance." His eyes followed me, wide and hollow, as though he was only now realizing the full weight of his downfall. As I walked out into the cool evening air, I didn't feel triumphant. There was no victory in watching someone crumble. But there was clarity. He had asked once, "Why are they all leaving?" Now he knew. And the truth was harsher than any sabotage could have been. He had undone himself, and I had simply refused to cover for him. At Nord Atlantic, the news of my old company's collapse spread quickly. Employees flooded the market, scrambling for new jobs. Contracts were rescinded, projects abandoned midstream. Rumors swirled that the board was preparing to remove him, but by then, it no longer mattered. The damage was irreversible. Meanwhile, my desk was piled with new agreements, each one a reminder that respect was still the strongest currency in business. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from partners eager to confirm their trust. One of them, the Icelandic director, wrote simply, "Now they understand what we already knew. Without respect, there is nothing. I stared at that line for a long time, then closed my eyes. It was over. For him, the collapse would continue. More panic meetings, more hollow promises, more desperate explanations to a board that no longer believed him. For me, it was a beginning. I hadn't just survived. I had built something stronger from the wreckage. And in the end, the only thing I had really done was tell the truth.